Is this thing working? What's up, everybody, and welcome to the channel. This is David McCarricker. That's who I am. And the channel is Theory Underground. So for those who've never been here before, welcome. For those who've been along for the last 4 months of its development, welcome. For those who've been around for years, seeing its development before it had this new name and approach, welcome. Today is a very special day. I am a sort of nervous wreck because of what I have before us. Today, I am talking about the announcement of this course. Let me make this thumbnail larger. Being and Time, Summer 2023. I have been tasked with this in a sort of sense for a few reasons. First, because people know that I am influenced by this text. My first book, Waypoint, starts out with chapter 1 is a defense of Heidegger's style of writing in Being and Time. Chapter 2 uses Heidegger and Levinas to develop some critical media theory. And chapter 3 uses Karl Marx's life's work, and specifically his focus on labor power, as well as Being in Time from Martin Heidegger, to develop time-energy theory, which is a theory that has been in development for the last 8 years. The stuff currently existing on it is a little outdated in the sense that the theory's come a lot further than what you see in the existing book, but that's the way of it. Usually by the time you're finished with writing a book, you already want to go back and rewrite it, right? That's almost always how it works. And it is no different with Being in Time, a text that is largely considered or kind of rumored to be a sort of failure. Heidegger didn't finish the third division, in fact. We don't know if there's a third division. Like in his manuscripts, there might be something like it. I know Lee Braver wrote a book on the topic of the complete work, but really what we have with Being in Time is 2 divisions of what was supposed to be a 3-division work. Why? Well, there's much more important questions that we have to address before we can even get to that one. And so we'll kind of see what we're able to get to today. But what I wanted to talk about in today's lecture, it is going to be a kind of lecture today, is let's pull up the slides here. Actually, I've got an overview of everything, but I kind of want to assume an audience of people who already get it in a sort of sense, because I think that I should discourage you from trying to read Being in Time if it hasn't already been on your radar for a while. This is one of those texts that you gotta really want to read it, and if you try to read it a couple of times, it's gonna knock you down on your ass. So, if you wanna give it your first crack with this course, of course you're welcome. But I want you to have a sort of sense for what you're getting into, because this text is hardcore. I mean, it might be world. I know that it comes up on top 10 difficult books. It's right up there with, Ulysses by James Joyce. It's right up there with Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, right? Like, this is not something to commit to lightly. So today we'll be talking about why this text is so notorious, beyond the reasons I've already touched on. I'll be talking about reading problematic thinkers and difficult texts, why this is the best hard text for shit readers. And let's be honest, if you're watching this or listening to this right now, the chances are you're a shit reader. Even if you love to read, the chances are you are out of practice or more distractible than you used to be. That you have not as much time and energy to be able to commit to reading, and that's probably why you're on YouTube in the first place. Because let's be real. If you had large, repeatable blocks of energy-infused time that you could use throughout the week. You would probably be able to be immersed in great texts and not just listening to people on YouTube talk about them. And what I hope to do with this channel and with theory-underground.com, the website side of things, as well as the app that is in development, is to be able to make a bridge for people who are finding ways to get more time and energy in their weeks that they are able to put towards these kinds of texts because they have that desire cultivated. Maybe it was, you brushed up against some philosophy in the university, or if you're really lucky, in high school. But if not either of those things, maybe you're at work and you discovered theory tubers and you found out about philosophy through YouTube and podcasts. Welcome. No matter how you get here to this point where you're thinking about taking on a text like this, welcome. Welcome to the chat, by the way, everybody. There is a live stream side of this. I will not ever, with this channel, make the live stream chat the focus, because it's just as important that this is valuable to people joining in the future. But if you have questions that you want me to elaborate on that you think would be beneficial for the people who are here now, as well as the people who will be watching in the future, please do drop them down below as the stream progresses. Welcome, Tony Stark. Great to see you. I just met Tony Stark very recently, in fact, like a couple days ago in Guadalajara, Mexico, when Ann and I were on a sort of vacation. So very nice to meet you, Tony, in real life. Thank you for the tacos. It was great to walk around and talk philosophy. And so being in time, I wanna really take a step back here. Being in time. Why do I say this is a general outline for the already convinced? Because I really want you to realize that I don't have any sort of I don't think that this is a kind of text that anybody's going to just want to dive straight into if they've never really thought about it, unless you are really out on a limb here, like really, really out on some kind of like radical fringe shit, and you just love doing really crazy stuff. Like you would probably be the kind of person who runs marathons. You would probably be the kind of person who already read James Joyce's Ulysses. You would probably already be the kind of person who's read or wanted to read Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. Like you love difficulty and setting yourself new challenges. But for people in the world of philosophy who've become somewhat acquainted with being in time, the chances are you go, you know what? I draw a line somewhere, and I drew it with this text. And if that was your position, I wouldn't really blame you. I've got friends who are into philosophy who will say, Dave, I don't think I have to. I don't think I have to read this book. You're never going to convince me that I have to. I'm just not going to do it. And I go, cool, have fun. Have fun over there in the little kid side of philosophy. I'm going to be over here with the big kids. And we won't really be able to have certain conversations, because what this text does in the history of philosophy, there's no coming back afterwards. There's no thinking philosophically ever again without reference to this text. And that doesn't mean that you stay in this text. That doesn't mean that you become a Heideggerian. In fact, I think that's usually not the case. Derrida, Foucault, Arendt, Marcuse, like these kinds of thinkers were not Heideggerians, but they were profoundly impacted by Heidegger. One of my favorite thinkers is Emmanuel Levinas, who is also very influential on Jacques Derrida. Another one is Lacan. Lacan and Levinas, as well as the rest of the names I just listed, are examples of people who were profoundly impacted by phenomenology through Husserl, and then Heidegger's radical, imminent critique of Husserl's phenomenology that kind of brought this existential component to it. Famously, and well, a lot more popular actually, would be someone like Jean-Paul Sartre. He's probably more famous than most of them, because when you're getting into philosophy, existentialism is often somewhere that people want to go. Like for my sophomore year in philosophy, actually, that was my focus, was Camus and Sartre. But what they do with existentialism is something that Heidegger renounces. He doesn't think that they got the point of what it was that he was doing. And so he famously challenges or denounces Sartre's existentialism. And that's all kind of, in my opinion, neither here nor there. I think that the tendency is to make Heidegger a footnote to these other thinkers, or to focus on his interpretations of other thinkers from either the 20th century or from, previous to his moment. So, for instance, people will focus on his very unique interpretation of Nietzsche, very unique interpretation of Hegel, etc. I do not think that these things matter, or these debates or these kinds of comparisons matter nearly as much as focusing on what is the text itself trying to do? What is being in time purporting itself to do? What is the task that Heidegger explicitly lays out with this text? Why does he say that he's doing that? And then, more importantly, what is the function that it has on you or me, on the reader, on the person who really takes it on? That's what we'll be talking about as we go forward. The other things are just like, because this is a sort of access to everybody in the history of philosophy, culminating in the 20th century, it's a rite of passage for any thinker. Like, if you really want to be a thinker, then this is a rite of passage for you. Being in time is also fundamental for thinking time energy theory, as I already referenced with chapter 3 from Waypoint. And I'll get to that in a later slide. And then finally, I'll close out the stream talking about the logistical details. I've already gotten some messages in the last couple of days about, what will the schedule be like? I'd like to see if I would be able to make it. We'll get into all of that. Basically, the course for Division 1 is going to begin at the very beginning of June and then end the second to last week of July. And so that's the period of time that we're doing this. I know it's kind of crazy to be doing this in the summer, but there are people who are near and dear to me who've been thinking about taking on this challenge for the better part of a decade. And one of them is actually planning on, now that he's got a sweet teaching job, I mean, it's not sweet in the sense of high paying, but he does get, because it's a teaching job, summers off. And that's Nick from the K-Voy channel. Nick, the 1/4 of the Young Zizekians. Nick is going to be off. So, hey, Nick, I know you can't watch this right now, but you're part of my audience right now because I know you will be watching this in the near future. People like Nick are kind of going to be the ones, I'm guessing, who probably benefit from this video the most, but and that'll be part of the reason why I'm directing it towards him. And that is to say that he, like Anne in the chat, has for years thought, someday I will take on this challenge. Someday I will read this. And he was really getting to the point where he was like, Dave, I need to hear you lecture on some shit. Like right now you've been doing all this stuff with Theory Underground, but I need you to actually just, I want your lectures. And then Mikey, and I was alluding to this at the very beginning of the lecture, actually tasked me with doing this. He was like, look, I'm doing For They Know Not What They Do. You and Elton did the PMC course. You and Ann and Brian did the Idea of the University course. The Professional Managerial class course, the Idea of the University course, and the What is Sex course that I'm now doing with Cadell Last. It actually starts in May. All of these are kind of with other people. And I have done some solo lectures in these courses, or I do my own lectures and then they do their lectures or whatever. And we've been experimenting with different formats, but I have not taken on a serious undertaking like teaching a text, like Being in Time. And so this is one of those things where it's like, I don't know if I'll ever be ready, but the time is now. I really do just have to do it. Nothing will get me into shape better than doing this. And for people who've been looking for a serious challenge, who've been thinking, like, I already give myself so much grief in all these other ways, but I need to purposefully, deliberately take on something that's going to kick my ass. I need to basically kill myself in a way that's less harmful than other ways that I could be killing myself. Well, something like this could be just what the doctor ordered. And so in Nick's case, yeah, he's taking the summer off because he's a teacher. He's going to go to Italy. And outside of some quality time he'll spend with others, his routine is going to be waking up early in the morning, reading this book for hours, which will feel like pounding his head against a concrete wall sometimes, maybe a lot of the time. I'm guessing at this point, because he's been reading so much Lacan and Zizek, it might be a little bit more accessible for him than it will be for some other people. But yeah, you kind of really have to give yourself to this text. You kind of have to try to read it every day for the period that you are going to be taking it on. And so that's sort of the warning, and that's why I say this is a general outline for the already convinced. I could see somebody watching this now becoming convinced over the next few years that yes, this is one of those kinds of texts that they will actually have to commit to and take on as a challenge. I could see that becoming the case for someone who's watching this right now, but I think in most cases, you would have to have already been thinking about this for a while and going, okay, maybe now is the time. So why is it so notorious? First and foremost, it's the difficulty. You will want to die or rage quit. So, I mean, some people, they blame themselves for all the problems of the world. Other people, they blame the world for all of their own problems, right? In the exact same way, when you're reading a difficult text like this, there will be one of two responses. And one will be like, you want to die, you will have a headache, you will feel like totally humbled or whatever. On the other side, you just are pissed off that it was written in such a frustrating style, and you'll want to throw the book against the wall. Okay. I think for me, it's probably a mixture of the two when I'm reading a text like this. I mean, at this point, now that I've read it a few times, I think it's a lot more rewarding in the sense of it's a mixture now of jouissance and pleasure. Like there's parts that I still get real profoundly confused in, and I'm like struggling with. But there's also a lot of times where I'm like reading stuff and it's like, oh yeah, no, I think I get this now, which is really cool. It's rewarding for sure. But the more controversial thing is the politics, Heidegger's Nazism. I have here on the slide, it says politics. Heidegger is a backwards peasant. Well, I mean, that's sugarcoating it, right? It's almost a way of downplaying it, because obviously he's a Nazi. Now, I've heard various ways of talking about this that say, yes, nothing in the world could ever excuse his unapologetic affiliation with the party. He thought that there was a way to influence things for the better by being involved. And, this is actually a reason to be hypercritical of institutional reformism. Then the Black Notebooks came out, and there's a sentence in there where he basically says something about the World War and about our German youth. The best of our German youth have been being killed off and blah, 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 blah. And you can basically see that he's a technological reductionist in the sense that he thinks that it is, I don't want to say it's just technology that he's blaming as like the situation during the World War. But there's an element of that. There's an element of, it's not quite technology, because we'll have to get into it with his question concerning technology. It's in-framing. It's the fundamental disposition that humans have taken on in modernity towards viewing the world of things and others as reducible to use values, exchange values, maximization of profits, but especially as just being on call or in the way to the servicing of our desires, right? So this kind of reductionism obviously skirts the issue that's on the forefront of your average American's mind, which would just be, okay, but what about Jews? What's his position on Jewish people? Does he believe in a global Jewish conspiracy, or is he an apologist for the Holocaust? He remained quiet. He remained fucking quiet as shit on these issues, and that is the reason that we can just denounce him as being backwards. We can definitely read through his work and say, okay, so in what ways was his philosophy influenced by these potential prejudices? The only thing that I can say for sure, though, is that he's not on the level of like a Himmler or of a Goebbels or of a Carl Schmitt. So Himmler and Goebbels, like they're like these opportunistic bureaucrats. They don't care about anything except for winning, and they are willing to scapegoat Jewish people to the nth degree possible. And they were like some of the worst guys in Hitler's regime. Someone like Carl Schmitt, on the other hand, is read still by philosophers, especially liberals today, because his concept of the political, as well as political theology and other books that he wrote, really get to the heart of some of the contradictions and problems of statecraft itself. Defining politics as the friend-enemy distinction, and believing that anything really necessary in order to win, and that there is nothing outside of law except for the state of exception that is used to instantiate a regime. Like these kinds of ideas that are so essential to any totalitarianism were especially influential on Hitlerism, and Carl Schmitt is a political Nazi. Heidegger is more like an Immanuel Kant or a Hegel, or he's a philosopher, right? And so he's not doing political theory. There is a way of reacting to his involvement with the party where you say, look, I don't care. I don't care because he's not doing political philosophy, so it doesn't really matter. Because if Einstein had bad politics, it wouldn't make the relativity theory less relevant. And I think that was more my position when I first got into reading Being in Time. And I'll talk a little bit about how I got into it in the first place. But I'm a lot more critical of that position now. I think that's fine if you just want to have that as your default setting, especially when you're reading this text for the first time, because you kind of have to take it on its own terms. And as far as like doing a thorough critique of it, or reading people who have done thorough critiques of it, as trying to tease out like what might these influences be, is worthwhile and should be done. And I will talk about this throughout the course, but it will not be the major emphasis, because the question of Being in Time, it's not an inherently political question. It is a question of what not just like with Kant, what are the limits of science as far as like understanding goes, and are there kinds of knowledge beyond that? So it goes even farther and deeper in a way, and it is actually a critique on Kant, Descartes, really all of modern philosophy. But it's not like Husserl, right? It's not like he's not just trying to found a basis for mathematics and logic in perception, or in the lived experience, which is, Husserl is obviously one of the most influential philosophers for Heidegger. And what I just described is Husserl's approach to phenomenology. But for Heidegger, it's going to be a lot more like, have we lost touch with the founding questions of philosophy? Have we lost touch with like what it even means to be a person? Do we even have the capability of posing these questions in a non-superficial way that leads to non-ridiculous answers? Is there a way of doing philosophy that doesn't just participate in the industrial pseudo-problem complex called academic philosophy today. That's kind of Heidegger's approach. And so his politics, though we can say they have nothing to do with his philosophy, I think that that's wrong. I think that there's a way that we can definitely look at this as something, there's a lot more going on there. But to be critical of it, we first have to have a basis in it. And so the rest of this conversation, the rest of this lecture needs to be on, well, so why do we want a basis in it then? If it's not for these reasons, then why do we want that basis? Which is where we turn to this next part. Point 3 on the slide here. The most radical critique of modernity. Being in Time is the most radical critique of modernity. That doesn't mean it's the truest critique. That doesn't mean it's the only one that you should take most seriously. But considering the fact that we are subjects of modernity, that we are profoundly influenced by a century where liberalism, Marxism, and fascism were duking it out on the world stage, something that critiques all three, liberalism, Marxism, and fascism, all three, at a level that goes beyond just an analysis of science and logic and their bounds, and goes into like the question of what it actually means to be a human, is an inherently worthwhile endeavor if you are committed to the task of philosophical thinking. Philosophical thinking in the tradition, as set forth by Socrates, who was killed for not just getting on board with bandwagons, who was killed for challenging common sense and doxa, who was killed for critique of ideology in a sort of sense, who was killed for taking a resolute stand on his historical moment and saying, no, I'm going to do what I think is right, even though you might read me a couple thousand years later and think that I had it coming, which is often a kind of funny response from normie students who read him and just go, well, why is he so antagonistic? Why does he want to question everything? Fuck, no wonder they wanted to get rid of this guy, right? Well, in his trial, in the Apology, Plato's The Apology, where Socrates is on trial, he famously says that the unexamined life is not worth living. He would rather die. But he can't just do that in solitude. He can't just do that in exile, which is why when he has the opportunity to flee, he refuses to flee, and instead he drinks the poison. He says, no, I'm going to stay. I'm going to make you all live with what you've decided, which is that free critical inquiry and dialogue, really, the dialectic, is banned. It's outlawed. We're not going to have it in our society. If you don't think that we're going to have it in our society, then I'll make you live with that, and I'll drink the poison just like was commanded of me, or just as the judges has sentenced. If you believe this idea, though, that the unexamined life is not worth living, if you are trying to live the examined life, then that means that you want to challenge doxa, ideology, the baggage of presuppositions we bring into this life. And I mean, look, some people just come to philosophy because they like to find little ideas and quotes to bolster up their preconceived notions and sort of ego ideal project. Okay, you definitely meet these people when you're doing philosophy, right? But if you really want to challenge yourself in a way that throws you out of your comfort zone and makes you feel like you confused in like this profound way where it's like, I thought I understood what life was all about, and now I don't even know. Like, I thought X, Y, and Z things for sure were just obvious and made sense, but now I don't know. If you kind of like being put into that space of confusion that is productive in the sense that it really helps you delve in deeper and figure out what it's all about and who you are, then the examined life requires taking on the perspectives of people who have radically different takes on existence and who will challenge us. Nobody has challenged me more than Heidegger. I disagree with him on more than almost anyone else. But at the same time, because people are so quick to disregard him and not take him seriously, as they are with Kant or anyone else, but they feel like they have a better reason when it comes to Heidegger, and so they're quicker to pull it out. I think, like, I'm in this weird bind of, on the one side, saying, no, this is one of the most important texts. You absolutely have to read it. It's also like a really cool philosophy text. Like, this is one of the coolest ones you'll ever read, like in the sense of like what its function is, the function on your consciousness will be. Like, it's a hell of a drug in that sense. But also on the other side of like, no, like this will really help you see the world in a way where you kind of realize how much of your shit was ideological, how much metaphysical and epistemological dogmatic presuppositions had creeped into your average, everyday, ordinary language and discourse with other people. Your mere perception of the world is not just ideological, but is actually theory laden. And so the approach for phenomenology is always to say, yeah, we've taken a lot of things to be true that are mere possible interpretations of reality. They're not reality itself. We perceive reality through mere possible interpretations. What are the overwhelming tendencies of these interpretations? What do they do for our perception and understanding of the world? And what is a way that we can counter that tendency so as to extricate ourselves from it somewhat, so as to get a critical distance on the situation that we are in? That's what phenomenology always has set out to do. And people say, oh no, it's just describing the world. It's just being descriptive about the world. Wrong. It's not true. Do not fall for this. That's not real. Description is definitely a big part of it. They definitely don't like doing speculative metaphysics where it's just pure speculation and logical deductions and inferences and all of this other stuff. No, they don't just build castles in the sky. They try to bring us back to immediate reality, right? Which is never uncomplicated. And say, okay, so for instance, I'm sitting here on a chair. Okay, I am sitting here on a chair. There are so many assumptions about the I, the chair, and the sitting just in that sentence. Okay, to deconstruct our habituated being in language and the way that we are in the world, so that we can get a better sense of what is before us, is only the first part. Then comes hermeneutics, because for Heidegger, it's phenomenological hermeneutics, which is to say, on the one side, it's describing things and bracketing off the metaphysical and epistemological baggage of modernity, describing things, but doing so in a way so that we can get to an interpretation that's going to give us a stronger, richer, deeper, not just intimate relation to the things that we're analyzing, but also sense of ourselves and place in the world. Okay. The other 2 points on this I'll get into in a second, as far as like the notoriousness of the text, but I want to touch in with the chat. Tony Stark says, I agree. You need mental stamina to read Heidegger. What if you lack mental stamina? I'm going to be arguing as we get to the next slide here that if you lack mental stamina, if you are hyper distracted, then this text is even more important for you. So we'll get to that in a second. So yes, this text is a rite of passage to all of these other thinkers of the 20th century. Careers were made vague posting about it, I say. Now, obviously with someone like Lukács or Bourdieu or Derrida or Sartre or Levinas, careers were made in dialogue with this work, as well as, being critical of it, interpreting it and interpreting it in very specific ways. Marcuse was as well. But There is also an entire industry of analytic philosophers and even continental philosophers who were being selectively quiet about this text, while nonetheless their philosophy cannot really be understood, like why they're choosing to do what they're doing without having a basis in this text. Because being in time is something that they pass through and it changes them. And we'll get more into what kind of function and change it forces on the reader as we go on. And then finally, this book is a failure. I already touched on that though, so I'm just going to keep moving with the slide here. I've already talked a lot about how difficult it is, but I have the title of this slide, Difficulty, the Deep End. The deep end metaphor is one that I've used a lot. Some of you might be familiar with it, but basically it's like there's two ways of learning. One is scaffolding, where it's step by step, and you get all the base constituents of whatever it is that you're trying to learn piecemeal and in bite-sized chunks, and eventually you build your way up to a college reading level or to higher math or science or whatever it might be. The other learning style is just to be thrown into the deep end. This metaphor is one that is playing off of swimming, because there is this idea that you can be thrown in the deep end of the pool and you will figure out how to swim the moment it gets real, right? Oh, I can't touch the bottom anymore. I don't have a floaty device. I better just start moving my arms. I better just start trying to grab onto anything. Like, I'm figuring it out, figuring out how to swim. I think there's actually an old John Wayne movie where he teaches a kid how to swim by throwing the kid into the deep end of the creek or whatever it was. And the kid's mom is like, no, don't do it. And then it turns out fine, right? Now, I don't recommend doing it that way. If you have a kid and you're trying to teach them how to swim, that could actually turn out poorly, right? Maybe don't do that. I don't know. Maybe go in there with them, right? And try to help them a little bit. But when it comes to a text, you're not going to really die. You'll just feel like you're dying. When it comes to a text and you're jumping in the deep end, taking on one of the hardest books ever written, I think that there are a variety of benefits that come with this. One of them being that every year, it seems like, in academia, the standards are lowered. You are more and more frequently not really held to some kind of a standard that assumes or tries to actually check that you did the reading, or that you did it in a very thorough way, or that you're really thinking through and dwelling with a text. More and more, you don't even have primary texts. People in the chat or in the comment section in the future, do let me know if you've taken classes on fundamental topics, but you never even read a primary text. Those standards have been lowered. The college level for reading, like, used to be something, it used to mean something. But now you have people in, advanced classes reading basically young adult, or youth fiction kinds of texts. So that's not the way that it is everywhere, but the chances that you're really going deep into primary texts, those chances have been lowered. When that's the case, does it really make sense to do the scaffolding approach, to do the baby steps approach? You've been reading your whole life. You're more distracted than you've ever been. You want to get serious about reading, but anywhere you would go, any institution that exists for this, they're kind of lowering the standards. So if you keep trying to scaffold yourself, you're going to end up being in your 40s and you still haven't gotten there because those standards are being lowered as you're climbing, right? Just take the hardest end of the spectrum and just dive into it and get lost for a summer. Get profoundly shook for a summer. Feel like you've been hitting your head against a wall for a summer. This is, I think, a way to really accelerate your development, not just of your reading comprehension level itself, but also of the discipline of sitting down and reading for a couple hours every day. Now, Dave, I have a job. I cannot do that. I'm so busy. Or, oh, Dave, I'm a graduate student and I'm teaching classes while also writing my thesis, and there's just no way I'm going to be able to do it. Totally understand. And I pity your soul or whatever. But there are people who are able to do it. They just need a little motivation and help. And that's who we're here for. If you've retired, if you're unemployed, if you are able to get into some kind of work that frees you up to be able to take this on, awesome. I don't know that listening to something like this would make any sense. I know I'm a big advocate for listening to texts. You could experiment, I suppose, but I'm not going to say that that is going to work. Could it really radically accelerate your listening comprehension skills? I mean, when I was burnt out in 2020 and didn't feel a motivation to do anything, and I started listening to Moish Passone's Time, Labor, and Social Domination text while playing Stardew Valley. I did not know what was going on in that book most of the time. I got like 2/3 of the way into it, and then I actually started to kind of click and realize what was actually, things started to click for me. I realized what was actually going on with that text. So I started it over again and started listening again, and I got a lot more out of it on the second pass. That was cool for me. I mean, it helped me realize like, I can actually radically accelerate the development of my listening comprehension abilities while doing passive activities like gaming. Multitasking activities like gaming. Like, it is possible. I'm not making any promises, though. I genuinely think that if you're going to take this on this summer, you should probably also be planning a sort of regimen for your life where you are forcing the time to really struggle with the text and turn pages. Yeah, I think I actually read this book in my like third or fourth semester of my associate's degree, which for those outside the U.S. who don't know what an associate's degree it is, I mean, it's kind of like you probably get something close to an associate's degree at the age of 16 in a lot of European educational institutions. But, at a community college in a small town, that's going to be the real first kind of foothold to taking on some kind of a PMC career, right? And I was interested in going into forestry. I wasn't planning on doing, I didn't know what philosophy even was at the time. I was 23 years old when I started college after kind of burning out at other entry-level jobs and stuff. And I had the reading and listening comprehension of a frog, of a worm, of a mosquito. Like, I could not, for the life of me, read for shit. And thankfully I had a couple of good professors who really kind of held my feet to the fire. And one of them told me, no, you can't just do philosophy for 20 minutes at the beach. You have to go somewhere and set yourself up free of distractions and just do it. And it's not going to be easy, and you'll have to grit your teeth and push through it. So, that was kind of my beginning into philosophy. But with being in time, that became it became a part of my life because Bruce Bierman, who I've interviewed on this channel, I'll be re-releasing that video soon. I was really influenced by his courses. I thought that everything he did was awesome. Like, he was into all these really cool thinkers, and I really like to talk about these cool thinkers, but I didn't like to actually read them, right? Because I'm a busy student. I don't have time for this, right? And I was kind of going through my new atheist phase at the time, kind of a naive, progressive new atheist phase. And one day he was just like, look, you just have to read Kant's Critique of Pure Reason and Heidegger's Being in Time. You can't keep making excuses. You can't keep trying to have these conversations with me. There are just fundamental experiences that you have to go through that you haven't gone through. You'll just have to do it. And so I took it on, and the first couple of times that I tried to read Being in Time, I got stuck in the introduction, which is why I will not be recommending that you necessarily start at the introduction. I mean, if you already have, then great. But the introduction, I mean, Hubert Dreyfus is the famous American academic who really popularized Being in Time at UC Berkeley. And he says, no, don't read the introduction, just start with chapter 1. Because Heidegger wrote the introduction after finishing the first 2 divisions of Being in Time. So, and it's long. I mean, it's like chapter 1 of Being in Time is like 9 pages, and the two parts of the introduction to Being in Time, that's like, I don't know, it's like 50 pages or something. Just don't. It kind of presupposes that you've already done the reading. We'll get more into the logistics and how to approach the text once we're finished. But my basic point is I got on and fell off, and tried to read this text. And thankfully, Bierman was able to meet with me a couple of times to give me a little bit of help. But the main person that I was trying to read the text with fell off, didn't want to finish it, was just like, I can't do it. When I started trying to read this text, John Stuart Mill was a difficult read for me. John Stuart Mill is like reading Dr. Seuss now. That's what I mean by diving in the deep end to accelerate the development of your reading habit and of your reading comprehension. That profoundly impacted me going back over some John Stuart Mill later and being like, I used to struggle with this guy. Now he's like small potatoes. So accelerate the development of your reading comprehension. There's no time to start like now. Okay, that's basically that. The next point is that it's as hard as it comes, but it's intuitive. Okay, I don't think the logic of science or the logic of sense or even the phenomenology of spirit or difference and repetition or 1,000 plateaus, like these giant and extremely difficult texts, Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, these are not very intuitive. You read them and then you kind of reread them, and you have to kind of check out some lectures online and like some secondary texts, and things start to click. But the nice thing about phenomenology is that we're not doing airy-fairy speculation and pure logical, crunching out in the ether. No, this is always brought back to our lived reality. The point of departure in Being in Time is our lived experience in the world. Now, it's a different world that he's in at the time. He references cars at one point, cars and their turn signals when he's developing his own sort of theory of signs and everything like that. But for the most part, we could say that it's a different world, but it's also the examples he's using are still relatable. One passes through the door the way one passes through the door. We walk through doors the way one does. Now, that might vary from culture to culture, but people pick up a general way of going about their daily routines that is what he calls average everydayness. The point of departure for Being in Time is from average everydayness. That takes on different colors, that takes on different forms, but every society has its own average everydayness, right? Hubert Dreyfus kind of uses the example of the distance people will stand when they communicate. In some societies, it's very close. In some societies, it's very far. And when you've got people who are not from a culture in a different culture and they don't intuitively know what the appropriate distance is, maybe they break that without realizing it. That's kind of there are these embodied habits that come with average everydayness, right? to the language that he's going to use to talk about that kind of phenomenon is different and kind of weird and will throw you for a loop, and you won't really know what's going on at first. But as you get your footing in the difficult style, there are intuitive examples being used. And that is what I think is what makes this so much better, as far as like, if you're a shit reader, you're trying to develop a better reading habit, and you're developing your reading comprehension, it's good to read someone who's going to constantly bring things back to kind of relatable, concrete examples. Yes, you're going to have to kind of like learn a new language for talking about these things, but at least there is that concrete lived referent. And then finally, the points being made are proven by the style. So the difficulty of the writing style is actually necessary for the points that he's trying to prove about language and meaning itself. And that is my contribution to this conversation. I published a piece called something like Why Wrestle with Being in Time in an undergrad journal when I was working on my bachelor's. And this guy I had never met, who saw it get published, and he was also published in the same journal. I guess like he went and looked at the downloads on it, and I had like, I don't know, like 50 downloads or something like that on this PDF. And so he calls me out on social media, talking a bunch of shit, saying that my thesis was unoriginal. And then he sends me an email talking about how, I know you were just downloading and re-downloading and re-downloading your PDF. There's no way in the world that anyone would want to read this unoriginal, uninspired piece of garbage that you wrote, like something like that. And this is somebody who in his profile picture looked like a totally normal person, but I'm guessing he was probably on some kind of a bender, some kind of you know what I mean? Nothing against this person. They probably was just having a really bad week or something, but it was just patently absurd. And I actually reached out to Dr. Ian Thompson at the time, because Dr. Ian Thompson teaches at University of New Mexico, Albuquerque. That's where Dr. Adrian Johnston also teaches. But I reached out to Thompson because I think he's one of the leading Heidegger scholars in the world. And I said, look, this guy is accusing me of having an unoriginal thesis. I did the best I could to research, like, if there was an argument like the one I'm making here anywhere else in the literature, and I couldn't find anything. So I'm not aware that it's unoriginal. I'm just curious, can you take a look at my paper and tell me if it's unoriginal? And so he read my Why Wrestle with Being in Time, and then he said, yeah, no, this is original. You're addressing an actual lacuna in the field. Lacuna just means like a gap or a hole in the field. And so good job. And I said, okay, great, thank you. I mean, I figured this guy was, it was a really weird situation. I bring that up just as like a funny story to lead into my piece that I wrote, which is actually chapter 1 of Waypoint, which was my defense of Heidegger's style. I've kind of just this morning put this together as like a sort of bullet points version of my argument there, which is just this. We are always in language. Okay? Our relation to meaning is not scientific first, but one of familiarity, right? We are always already in language. We cannot get outside of language. Even when we think that we are free of language, we perceive in a way that has presupposed a sort of symbolization of the world of things that is linguistic or semiotic, at least. So, you could argue that there might be types of meditation or psychedelic experience that break free of language. I would say, okay, fair enough, maybe. But even then, that's in relation to our normally being embedded in language. And so our experience of being free of language only makes sense in reference to always being in language. And so we are beings always in language, inextricable in a sort of sense, and meaning everything in our lives. Like, we'll kill ourselves over meaning. We'll sacrifice over meaning. We'll do anything for meaning, right? Meaning is a function of language, and it's something we're always inside of. So if we want to live the examined life and we can't extricate ourselves from language, is that a problem? Are we in a circle? This is the circle that Heidegger wants to drill into and flesh out, because if we can't get out of it, then there might be things that we can do that are still more advantageous for living the examined life. So we are always in language. Our relation to meaning is not first scientific, but it's one of familiarity. And then beyond intentionality, which is kind of like, there is no such thing as will, void. There's always consciousness of something, right? This principle of intentionality that gets kind of understood, or it gets, it's there in its proto form with Aristotle and the scholastics, but it really gets developed as the basis for a new kind of psychology by Brentano, and is influential on Freud as well. But no, it really gets taken up by Husserl. Beyond intentionality, though, we comport, right? Comportment is one of these words that is not very commonly used, but that Heidegger uses. In History of the Concept of Time, Heidegger just says outright that intentionality in its being is comportment. What is he doing when he says this? The point is that we are not just embodied, always having a perspective from some point, right? And that there's no such thing as like a purely objective way of analyzing an object. And then we can't just talk about Platonic forms existing out there. No, ideas that humans have come from beings who have intentional perception of things, right? And so this is what Husserl wants to drill down into. But Heidegger's point is that intentionality is in its being comportment. We go about our lives. This is what comportment has to do with. Like, he says, you come into the room and you move the chair. You're not even thinking about the chair. You move the chair so that you can get to the couch and sit down. Why did you move that chair? Or let's say that you're moving the chair and you're going to the couch, but you realize something is off in the room and you can't even put your finger on it. But maybe someone has been there before you and moved some things around, and so something's off, and it kind of throws you into this space of uncanniness, and it disrupts what you were going to do. Oh, I was going to watch Netflix, but all of a sudden now I'm thinking, well, wait, am I safe? Has someone else been in here? Have they been, going through my things? Like, what's going on here? That experience is not just an experience of an isolated, subject scientifically analyzing and moving through the world, evaluating truth claims logically. No, which is obviously where a lot of philosophy was and still is. But the point is that at this level of average everyday comportment in the world, we have a kind of relation with ourselves, the world, things, others, that has not been clarified in any rigorous way by any previous philosopher. Heidegger is going to want to drill down into that. Okay, so that's all just to explain point 3. We are always in language. Our relation to meaning is one of familiarity. Beyond intentionality, we comport. Next point. Things have their meaning on the basis of a horizon of possibilities. Some of those possibilities are pressing. Others are distant or dreadful, right? Our entire life is framed by a horizon of possibilities. What you think you're going to go do and what you think you should do, what you wish you had done, what you feel compelled to do as a sense of obligation, or maybe if you don't do this, then there will be something really, really bad that comes from not doing it, right? Oh, I'm going to choose this career to make this person happy, or to not end up in poverty, right? Like, Our horizon of possibilities and what we've thought through in terms of the possibilities on that horizon frames everything. Everything. This has also been never rigorously formulated in the history of philosophy. Heidegger's going to drill down into that. But this is, so far, I'm developing an argument. What is the argument? It's a defense of Heidegger's style. So why? Last point. To think meaning, we must be deliberate and break out of the habits of thought. There was a typo on that page. I fixed it. We have to break out of the habits of thought. Heidegger forces breakdowns. He has an entire theory of average everyday comportment and familiarity with the world. And he has a theory of how analytic mindsets and deductive reasoning skills and all of these other things kick in at the conscious level when there are breakdowns. But we don't kick into that headspace if there isn't a breakdown. First, the familiar has to become unfamiliar. If that doesn't occur, we're not going to be in that headspace. In the piece, I actually use the example of someone riding on their bicycle to work. The chain falls off of the bicycle. Oh, now they're going to be late. They got to get back on track. How are they going to do that? They got to look at the bicycle and go, okay, can I fix this? Or do I have to pay someone to help me fix this? Or do I have to call someone and get an Uber? Or like, what am I going to do here? And so they're trying to figure out, they're in the problem-solving headspace. The problem-solving headspace is the headspace that philosophers and scientists like to inhabit. So we like to problematize and then solve. Or there is already a problem, we want to understand the problem in all of its nuances, and then we want to solve it. But that's not the normal state that we are in. Most of Immanuel Kant's life was not spent in that headspace in a relation to his average everyday dealings. No, his average everyday dealings was like clockwork. Mikey was talking about this earlier today. His whole life was like clockwork so that he could mentally focus on really big abstract problems, right? If he wasn't, if his bicycle were to break down, if his leg were to break, if his bank account were to become empty, if his house was getting shut down, or he was getting evicted, or there was a war happening, and so he wasn't going to be able to keep living in Konigsberg or wherever he was living at the time. It would have created a very serious problem for and a distraction from his more abstract, logical kind of epistemology and metaphysical thinking. So while he's focusing on all of that, thinking about like the existence of the soul and eternity and God and all these things for Kant, he's presupposing a whole world that is functioning, right? And he is habituated to moving through that world in a sort of average everyday way of familiarity. We always have this expression about like, for the fish, water for the fish. The water doesn't have a concept of fish. The fish just is in water. The world is the same way when we're talking about existential worldhood. The world is the same way. It was the same way for Kant. He's not thinking about the world. He's thinking about these problems that have been developed by the tradition of philosophy. Heidegger says, fuck the tradition. If we want to talk about meaning, if we want to drill down into what we mean by these philosophical questions that we keep asking and acting like they are so important, if we want to get to the basis of these questions, like the question, what is being? Well, we can't even get down to that question. We can't even pose the question if we haven't first thought through what is the sense of the question? What is the meaning of the question? What kind of being asked the question in the first place? And does that have some kind of a crazy influence perhaps over the way that the analysis will unfold, the way that theories might be derived from such questions? Will obviously be impacted by the kinds of being asking the questions, yet the being who asked those questions has not been thoroughly, rigorously drilled into in this way that is meant to develop a theory of meaning, basically. So my defense of Heidegger's style is just that because we are language beings, language is the water to fish in this example, right? It structures everything for us, but our relation to it is immediate, familiar, and we take it for granted. And we can problematize a word and focus on this. Oh, you're using a different definition on that word than I am. Let's have a conversation about that. We can problematize a word. Or you do as an analytic philosopher does and take a problem from philosophy and then break it down into its component parts and then really think through what all the words mean. And then have arguments about how changing the words might change the results of the conclusions that we draw about the problem. But what about worldhood and meaning at the level of worldhood? We're not going to be able to do that without causing breakdowns in language. We have to throw ourselves out of the ready-to-hand relation with language if we want to free up a relation to the immediate phenomenon so that we can go, oh, wait, what's really going on here? So the point is not that Heidegger got it all figured out forever. The point is that the function of forcing breakdowns on oneself for an extended period of time, of defamiliarizing oneself with the familiar, is an inherently worthwhile endeavor if you want to live the examined life. All right, there's some chat I'm going to touch on really quick here. It looks like Mikey's in the chat. Speak of the devil. Coming from the phenomenology, spirit, being, and time seemed easy. Oh, coming from... Yeah, for real, actually. So Elon in the chat says, coming from the phenomenology of spirit, being and time seemed easy. I couldn't agree more. There's a lot of harder texts in the sense that it's harder to get a grip on what they're doing, right? It's harder to verify what they're saying by relating it to experience. Dan says, we should always be open to other modalities of understanding. Luis says, I was similar. I only read manga and Chinese fantasy novels until a couple years ago. Funny enough, Heidegger has had a huge impact on Japanese mass media. I had no idea. Press A in chat to accelerate. Mikey says, being in time changed my life in a way that few other books have. He says, I was a Heideggerian for 5 years. Easily one of the greatest works of philosophy ever written. Dave is an excellent guide to have on this journey. Thanks, Mikey. And then Luis says, legendary. Thank you. Okay, so, yeah, if you want to read my defense of Heidegger's style, go to Waypoint. It's available for free on my website. It's also available for purchase on Amazon, but you can get it cheaper from my website. So the only reason I say it's free, but then you can get it cheaper, well, yeah, if you want the print version, it's not going to be free. Hello, there's costs. So I think it's like $12 on the site. But I also did read it aloud and share the print version of it. And so all you got to do is go to theory-underground.com/waypoint, and it should be there. But let's move on from the defense of Heidegger's style. Time-energy theory is also something I develop in Waypoint. It's my whole life at this point. Obviously, Theory Underground has been my bigger focus, but Theory Underground is a vehicle to the education of myself, this plebe, and that I do that in a way that I hope will be beneficial for some others, not all others. A lot of others might find it more advantageous to just go to the university for their education. A lot of others might find it more advantageous to go for other learning approaches that are being that can be found at other online alternative education institutions. But if you're a hyper distractible kind of person and you need certain kind of countermeasures against the tendencies of the attention economy, because you're not going to stop using the internet, but you need to have certain kinds of countermeasures so as to really develop yourself and your ability to read, write, and have richer conversations, which is really the three components of thinking, as we keep saying at Theory Underground. If that's kind of your problem and your approach, and you've tended to find this stuff here useful, well then great, because that I'm doing it for people who will find some use value in really me extending my own education. So that's why, whether it's 5 people or 30 people that take this course, I'm going to be happy, because it's forcing my feet to the fire to really challenge me to play that role of subject supposed to know, so that I can dupe myself and hopefully others into thinking, oh, we've got a handle on this text. We're actually getting it. We're figuring it out. This is good. And even though we will be wrong sometimes, or I will fuck up, the point is to get that traction, because this is where the rubber's going to meet the road. But Theory Underground as a whole, and all of the courses being developed in it, are not just for me and my own education, it's for time energy theory. For me, I think that there's nothing more important in the world, or I wouldn't be doing it. I do what I think is the most important, and this is my calling, this is my challenge, this is my commitment, whatever. So that's a lot of pressure. My first book about it was all right. I think it gets the point across to some people. It's not like I'm ready to write about this theory for a broad popular audience, because let's be honest, I'm still fleshing it out. I've been focusing for the last few years on learning Lacan and Zizek, because I need a better theory of libido, or of libidinal economy, or of energy, right? And I can't have that without reading the contemporaries in the field who have thought about this. Like, some of the most important people to think about energy through are going to be Nietzsche, Freud, Lacan. Without a doubt, they are 3 of the most important. And Zizek is so important for understanding any of them really now, because of Lacan's intervention, and the fact that in a lot of ways it seems like a lot of people really didn't get the memo on what Lacan was doing. To be fair, he's very difficult to understand. But Zizek, it clicked for him. And through Zizek, Todd McGowan, and now Michael Downs are teaching me, and Michael Downs has been my main point of entry into the whole field, let's be fair. But really, McGowan unlocked Zizek for Mikey. Mikey unlocked all of these guys for me. So this is all, my entire focus on it is so that I can understand or develop time energy theory. I'm pointing at my tattoo on the camera here. I got the time energy symbol tattoo very recently, even though I've wanted it for 8 years. I just finally got it, because I was like, everything I'm doing, if a person just came to this channel or came to Theory Underground and was looking at the courses offered, they'd think, oh, Dave's some kind of a post-leftist critic of the PMC, or, oh, Dave's really into Zizek or some shit. That's not the point. The point is that they all serve some kind of an important role in the overall research project and development of time energy theory. And I wrote Waypoint not to a broad popular audience. I wrote it to fellow travelers, and I don't expect to have a lot of fellow travelers. I'm on paths less taken. There's not a lot of us on these paths. By necessity, philosophy is a singular task. It's a task for singular people who are working through thinking about their particular experiences and relating that to the universal, and then taking insights that they've had and then running those against the currents of the tradition and the heterodox theories and thinkers who challenge that tradition, and seeing how their own dogmatic, epistemological, and metaphysical presuppositions have been influenced and played out over time without even realizing it, right? We don't realize that we presuppose so much epistemological and metaphysical baggage without even doing theory, until we do theory, and then we realize, oh my God, I was so much deeper in it than I realized, and I just didn't even have this critical perspective on it. And obviously, there's nothing against having presuppositions. There's nothing against having concepts. But if you don't know what they are and you have them, yeah, it's kind of a problem if you're trying to live the examined life. And so I wrote Waypoint to an audience of people who are on this path with me, or who might be passing by me on this path. And I use this hiking metaphor in part because of Peter Sloterdijk's You Must Change Your Life book and his idea that, like, yeah, a lot of people just want to live at base camp. They don't want to climb the mountain. But also just because it is a general kind of metaphor. I mean, even Heidegger uses it. You go on these paths of thought, right? And you will inevitably meet other people on these journeys. If you've ever been on a long hike or on like a long backpacking trip, if you meet other people out in the middle of nowhere, there is a kind of camaraderie that exists between strangers out in the middle of nowhere that does not exist in cities. It's the exact opposite in cities. Yeah, in a neighborhood, there might be some kind of like fraternity or camaraderie or like neighborhood spirit, right? I know that like there can be even like subsections of cities that kind of people have an identity about it or whatever. But there's also in cities kind of this you do you, I do me, and we don't even make eye contact or acknowledge one another a lot of the time, and we're all individual, atomized people running about our business. Whereas in rural areas, there's a little bit more of like oh, your car broke down. Hey, do you need a hand? I can help you out. There's a lot more of that kind of neighborliness in like a lot of rural areas. But when you're out in the middle of nowhere, it's even more, right? You'll have a conversation around a fire with some people that you'll never see again in your life, but there's some quality to it because you've been in solitude and now you're with some other people and they've been in solitude and you've all taken on like a risk and you're out in the elements. That's why I like this metaphor of fellow travelers. I know it became very popular after like the failures of state Marxism. It became popular for people to use the term fellow traveler, but it was kind of like a happy accident for me. That's not why I use the term. I use the term because I like this metaphor. Anyway, so Waypoint gives a fellow traveler a sort of orientation to my thought, my approach, what matters to me, why I do what I do. And it's the key to unlock everything that's going on the channel. If you haven't read it, then you probably just think, oh, Dave's just one of those young Jijikians, and this Theory Underground thing is like a course site for the young Jijikians. I couldn't blame you if you think that, but the young Jijikian thing is like a meme gang. It's like me and a couple of buddies like having a conversation, and sometimes we do stuff together. It's not like a real podcast. It's not a real channel. It's not anything except for like some buddies getting together to talk theory. And it was, in the first place, coined ironically, right? It was coined when that In Defense of Theory stream happened, when we brought Todd McGowan on to respond to Chris Catrone's sort of dismissal of a lot of continental philosophy. But what I'm trying to say is that, yeah, without Waypoint and understanding like the development of time energy theory and its sort of intervention into social change theory and the development of critical media theory, without those things, which that's the subtitle of Waypoint, then you're just not going to get what's going on. And so I'm not doing this as a plug for my book because, I mean, if you have been enjoying stuff so far, I would rather you read Being in Time than my book. But yeah, time energy theory is something that's been on the back burner while I've been learning about jouissance and death drive and, you know, subjectivity as developed by Lacanian theorists. But time energy theory is really everything for me, for Mikey. It is like the intervention, because if any one political ideology or system were to win today, because time energy has not been thought out, because it's not been developed, we can know for a fact that whatever they replace the existing system with would be fucking garbage. It would not provide the most essential conditions of possibility for living a quality life. We can approximate time energy by just saying leisure, because I think a lot of people, when they say leisure, they have something like time energy in mind. But this is misleading, because people also think that they have leisure on the weekend. People think that they have leisure on the week, at the end of the workday. That's not leisure time. That is garbage time if it is time without energy. Oh, but what about when you have energy on the weekend? Yes, that is still not time energy, because time energy is large, repeatable blocks of energy-infused time. Okay. One-off weekend when you have some energy and you don't have to go to a wedding or do some kind of chores or errands or you've got specific plans to catch up with some people or whatever, that one-off time when you got the energy to actually do something, you go, oh my God, if I always felt like this, I could like learn the violin and speak 6 languages and be studying being in time. But instead, no, I only get this kind of energy every once in a while. Okay. The point is we have to have large, repeatable blocks of energy-infused time. And without that, without time energy, it's pretty much passive consumer activities. And then you get enough energy to go, well, let's go do something. Well, shit, let's go to the movie theater. Let's go to the bar. Let's go dance. Let's go, whatever it is, maybe some kind of a hobby. That hobby is stepping in because you've basically already learned how to do the thing. And now you've got the energy, so you go do the consumer activity. Time energy is the condition for being able to do those kinds of difficult, challenging activities that make you feel alive, proud to be alive, almost like useful to others, or like someone that others would like pay attention to, like, oh wow, you're a violin virtuoso, amazing. Oh, you speak 6 languages. Wow, this is great. Let's have a conversation. Or wow. Like your ability to even approximate anything that could ever give you any kind of social recognition for achieving anything worthwhile that actually gives back to others is fundamentally undermined in a world where you don't have time energy. Okay? But time energy theory wouldn't have developed without Being in Time, the book we're talking about right now, and Karl Marx. There's other thinkers who really do contribute to it. Adorno has a wonderful little essay called Free Time, etc., etc., etc. But time energy is an existential in Heidegger's sense. And realizing that Heidegger's thought through like some of the most profound and immediate things that we all take for granted in a radical new light, and this has changed me forever. And his analysis of time is so different than everyone else's, and it's so worthwhile. Came into like this kind of like, but wait a minute, this realization. He doesn't even think about labor power, right? Time energy becomes labor power in capitalism. And though it's decommodified, it's nonetheless still labor power in Soviet Russia or Mao's China, right? In any actually existing socialism that has ever occurred, people still gotta fucking work, right? And not only do they have to work, but now because they're taking on capitalism, they have to work harder. Because, well, we gotta all work together, comrade, because otherwise the imperial invaders are gonna come over here and subjugate us again, right? So the 20th century was the sort of battle between communism and capitalism, or you could say between liberalism, fascism, and communism, whatever. The point is that all of them presuppose the exploitation of time energy, and none of them advance a program that can plausibly provide everybody with large, energy-infused, repeatable blocks of time. So, time energy theory is a fundamental intervention. The stuff with the PMC that I do at Theory Underground, it's just so that, because we got to think, like, where does social change come from? Or where do people think that it comes from? Or in social change circles, so-called, who are the people occupying these roles? They're people with relative time energy compared to everyone else, fewer backbreaking demands put on their bodies to sap out their energy, more of this kind of like mental labor, right? Which is still suffocating and alienating in its own way. But the point is like more the PMC has more ability to direct its time and energy relative to everyone else below in terms of class. Obviously, the ruling class is in a different sphere altogether. But if the social change makers through reform or revolution, from bottom up or top down, were to fundamentally transform things today, but they take for granted time, energy, and just think that the good life is about people having jobs or being able to consume, and they haven't fundamentally thought through what are the conditions of possibility for being able to have the good life, well, we'd still be fucked. That's the intervention as far as time, energy, meaning PMC theory. Now, and if you've watched the lectures, then you already know this. There's a whole playlist on the channel right now. I'll actually pull it up here because it is important that you know about it. But if you go to Theory Underground on YouTube and scroll down, it is this course right here. Can I actually show it? Well, I can't fully show it for some reason. There you go. PMC Consciousness and Ideology. The playlist is right there. You got to go through that. It's its own thing. It's also important. But my point is this, to bring it back to time energy theory. Time energy is an existential. Existentials are structures of our lived experience called, well, Heidegger calls them existentials. And that these need to be separated from the categories derived by studying compartmentalized objects of the sciences, right? So most philosophers of modernity up to this point were using kind of hand-me-down concepts taken from the sciences that they were studying and applied to philosophy, which obviously subjugates philosophy into its own compartmentalized field. But if philosophy is to deal with the whole human experience and understanding ourselves in it, then the categories that we derive from that human experience should not just be hand-me-downs borrowed from other domains of science, but need to be developed from the subject matter themselves. So that is the whole point of phenomenology, is to, let's stop borrowing concepts. Let's figure out what can we see here, what can we develop without borrowing our shit from elsewhere, okay? And the structures of lived experience that aren't these categories that belong to standard fields of science, these are going to be called existentials. Time energy theory comes from thinking about time in its existential sense, plus its relation to labor power, that are public, as well as a few that are private. The private ones are usually going to belong to classes where I'm still thinking through some things and working through various authors' texts that have been profoundly impactful on me. Texts like Das Kapital, Totality and Infinity, Being in Time. There's a lot of Bourdieu and Baudrillard that need to be brought in as well. And then there's the whole like understanding libidinal economy and like this course I'm doing with Cadell, What is Sex? Absolutely essential for that. But there will also be public lectures where it's like, okay, this is where this is at so far, and I can definitely talk about this. Like when I go on tour through the United States and Europe on the Theory Underground tour this fall, after I get married, that's going to be an opportunity for me to give public lectures about time energy, about all of these other things that I've been talking about on this channel. And not for a broad public audience, but for fellow travelers like Tony Stark in the chat, who I just met in Guadalajara, just fellow travelers who, it's like, look, there's not a lot of people on this path. I want to actually connect with the people who are thinking about these things and developing. For me, I'm developing this theory. But my question for you is going to be, what about you as a thinker? What about you as a theorist? As you develop, what is this kind of clearing created by a text like Being in Time going to do for you? We know what it did for people like Derrida, Foucault, Sartre, Levinas, Lacan. We know what this clearing did for them. But what will it do for you? For me, time energy theory is what's coming out of it. And the texts that time energy theory is coming from in a sort of sense. Like what those texts have helped me see is time energy. What will it help you see? Right? Who knows? But it is inherently worthwhile. First, because it's a hell of a drug that's less self-destructive than most drugs. Second, because the unexamined life is not worth living. And third, because you're not going to have it better. There's nothing better than going in the deep end with difficult texts and then coming back to them after a period of recovery and then realizing, shit, I'm getting more out of this than I thought. There's nothing better. I'm going to read a couple of these comments in the chat. For the people just joining, I do want to really, really, really encourage you to go back to the beginning, fast forward to catch up, play it faster to catch up, because I've covered a lot of ground, and I think I think I've basically tied it all together here towards the end, but there's a lot of really important shit in this. So if you're just coming in at this point in the stream, go back. Most people will be watching this in the future. Hello, people in the future. But yeah, if you're coming in right now, definitely go back, start watching it forward again. Isaiah, what's up, man? Welcome. Nance, yo. Tony, we need to teach the time energy theory to younger people. Yeah, that's true. But if you read Waypoint, I say at the introduction, everybody's always so concerned with reaching the masses. Nance was doing this recently. Well, how do we get this to more people? People need to be thinking about time energy theory. No, actually, in Nance's case, he was talking about the PMC theory. People need to understand how deep this goes, that it's not just a slur, that it has a material, objective, historical, class antagonistic basis, that it was developed for a reason to counter working class organizing in a way that is, well, it really explains a lot today. It kind of makes sense why we are where we are once you understand how progressivism developed it in the early 20th century. People need to know about this. True, people do need to know about this, but the rush to instrumentalize our own learning, the rush to turn theory into activism is a dead end in the world of acceleration, in the world of identity, consumerism, influencership online, always got to keep up with things, pump out content. What about us? What about me? I need to step back, create this clearing, get my basis in text, rework through these texts that have been profoundly influential on the development of the concept time energy. Yes, I will be beta trialing, talking about it with different kinds of audiences as I travel. Of course I will. And Anne's going to be helping me here very soon in Aguas Calientes. We're going to do a presentation on time energy where she's translating into Spanish. It's going to be fucking awesome. But reaching the youth, reaching the masses cannot be rushed. Okay. Marx spent a good 15 years of study before he got politically engaged. Okay. That goes for every great thinker. They spent a lot more time than you've ever even fathomed signing up for just doing the work, right? And now people say, oh, do the work. And they mean like read Robin DiAngelo. They've never even thought about what real work would mean when it comes to the life of the mind and living the examined life. Not just so you can understand and curate yourself, but so that you can understand the world and specifically what nerves or sort of points of tension or whatever need to be worked through or leaned into or avoided in order to create the conditions for mass change. So at the beginning of Waypoint, I say that I'm giving myself 5 years to not write to a popular audience. I'm giving myself 5 years just to think and not worry about rhetoric. I'm giving myself 5 years to just have a conversation with a much smaller group of people. This kind of goes to the whole thing about the courses. When people go, oh my God, you're charging money? What about the masses? Look, I care about quality. I care about people. First of all, I care about being able to put my time and energy into these courses so that I get a lot out of it and that I'm able to give a lot back to others and that they will hopefully be able to get a lot out of it. I do not think that that's possible at this point if I'm having to work other jobs, because working at Amazon and doing firewood and all these other things that I did after I got my degree, it's just, yeah, I was able to listen to audiobooks, but I could not do what I'm doing with Theory Underground. It's just impossible. So on the one side, I've got to make money right now because my fiance gets stressed out when I buy tacos. Even though they're so cheap in Mexico, it's still stressful when you don't have a lot of money coming in and you're buying tacos, okay? But if you have to focus on making every meal, then you don't have the time and energy to be doing this work, right? So there is this level to which, or at this certain level, I just have to do this for my own sake. But I think that it's going to be beneficial for other people. Then, as far as the benefit that other people get from something having a price tag on it, I think you're not free of capitalist influence in the sense that you take more seriously the things that you spend more money on. People take more seriously paying their rent than they do their Netflix because it costs a lot more money. Not just because they'll be homeless if they don't do it, but also because the things that you spend a lot of money on and then you see some kind of a return, oh, this is a nicer place that I have as opposed to what it would have been. You feel like that quality, it's different. And when people give away things for free, it gets taken for granted and you don't take it as seriously, even though you theoretically know that you take it seriously. Theoretically, I know that this course is the most important thing I could do this year. But practically, at this unconscious level, it doesn't follow. Because you haven't invested into it, now you don't invest into it. But if you do invest into it, then there's a little bit more of this, oh, but I got to take this seriously. Okay, I know that's true for me. If it's absolutely impossible for you, there is a scholarship program. Just go to theory-underground.com/scholarship. Okay, there's a way. If there's a will, there's a way. We can talk about it. But I do think that this price tag tier system is a necessary step forward for really raising the quality of the level of these conversations, right? We're going to read more seriously. We're going to write more seriously. And then we're going to have better conversations because we have this stronger basis in text and we're not just blah, 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 talking, theory, poetry. No, we're going to have a basis in the subject matter. We're going to have a basis in the primary texts. I need it. If you don't need it, I don't even know why you're here. But I do think you need it. And I think that that's why you're here. I think that a lot of the people in the chat right now and the people watching this in the future feel the need to do something crazy and really challenge themselves in a way they've never really done before, not just because it's a hell of a drug and it sure beats or it's less destructive than other drugs while being more fulfilling. No, but because thinking through who we are, where we are, what's going on in the world, and how do we change it, and all of these things requires a period of time stepping back, getting critical distance, working through concepts. And so it's sort of like a postponed revolution in my mind. Everything is towards this greater end, but it's postponed in the sense of it won't be worthwhile if people getting involved haven't really stepped back and really worked through things. Every course that you take at Theory Underground is potentially life-changing, but the ones that currently are on offer don't even scratch the surface of what's coming in the next 5 years. So when I say at the beginning of Waypoint that I'm giving myself 5 years, that means 5 years of my own development is going to also look like 5 years of fucking crazy courses that are just not on offer anywhere else in the world. Look, you could study being in time somewhere else. If you get to study with Dr. Ian Thompson in Albuquerque, fucking go for it. That would actually be probably one of the most rewarding experiences of your life. Absolutely. I definitely think that it would be. When I say that this is a course unlike any that you will have access to anywhere else, though, what I'm talking about is, obviously, yeah, you can get being in time elsewhere. But you're not going to get it with somebody who's got this blue-collar basis coming into theory. That's why people gravitate to the conversations I have with Mikey, the interview lecture style that we've developed. Why? It's because we're used to talking to normies of diverse backgrounds, okay, in the workplace. Decades spent doing that while also studying philosophy, okay? There's just no equivalent to that, first of all. Second of all, I don't take this for granted. And this is not just something that I do like clockwork, like it's my job. Like, some people are really good at their career and this is their job, this is their life, it is their passion, and being a professor is who they are. But it's also kind of taken for granted in the sense that, yeah, like I've got students this year and I'll have students next semester, and 5 years from now I'll still be doing this. For me right now, I'm in a 5-year plan. I don't know what comes after it. I might retire from the internet and go live like a hermit, or I might become a cyborg and explore space. I really don't know what's happening in the future. I don't give a fuck. I'm leaving a lot of wiggle room for myself to become in 5 years. The point is like right now is the time to drill into this text in a way that we've never done before. I've read it multiple times now, and now I'm taking on this crazy burden to make it relatable in a way that I don't think other people are going to be able to make it relatable to you if you're anything like me, tending to be distracted, multitasking, undisciplined when it comes to reading. We're developing a new approach to the life of the mind. It might not be better, but it's better than nothing. And so I think that it'll be worthwhile. So that's basically like my almost 2-hour plug for this course. It's been an hour and 45 minutes. The first 5 minutes was just a song. So I guess it's been an hour and 40 minutes. But I've got two last slides. Let's go over them. Finally, what can you become? And I already basically touched on this. What can you become? A text that forces the familiar to become unfamiliar in a way that's more relatable and profoundly impactful than any other text in the history of philosophy. What will you become? Will you become a Lacanian who at least has a basis in what Lacan had a basis in? Will you become a Levinasian who at least had a basis in what Levinas had a basis in? Will you become a Marxist like Marcuse, who is a Heideggerian Marxist of a kind? I hope not. I hope that the time that you spend with any thinker is just time that you're spending with that thinker as a student of that thinker. So that when you say I'm a Lacanian, it means I am a student of Lacan. Not I'm a dogmatic, lifelong, no. I don't want to make you become a Heideggerian. I want you to be able to see the world through these eyes to the best of my ability. That's my goal. Not to sell you on a worldview, but to sell you on a practice that brings with it liberation, at least at the individual level. What is the clearing going to open up for you? What are the possibilities there? That's the question. Let's close out on a quick little rundown of the logistics, because I know that for people like Adam, that's a big question. I was getting a few people messaging me saying, yo, what's the actual schedule going to look like? Like, how's this going to go down? I hate to make promises too far out in time. And nowadays, it's pretty difficult not to, because I'm doing course development and scheduling things out ahead of time. So obviously, I've got to talk out into the future somewhat. But being in time is a beast. And so I wanted to break it up into Division 1 and Division 2 to make it somewhat more realistic. Like, if you only are able to read Division 1 this year, then that's better than nothing. And you should give it your all. But then I want you to have some time to think. Am I up to the task of Division 2? And while you're thinking, for the month between Division 1 and Division 2, because there will be a whole month from basically mid-July till basically mid-August. In that month where you get to kind of just do the summer things that you want to do and think, okay, do I have what it takes to return to this text and to finish Division 2? While you're doing that, I'll be getting married. So Anne and I are getting married at the end of July, and then we are traveling the country after the honeymoon. Okay. And once we're traveling the country after the honeymoon, that's when I'll be back to teaching Division 2, I think. And that's the big thing is like, let's just say that 15 people take Being in Time Division 1, and then after Division 1, a lot of people go, there's no way in hell I'm going to be able to do Division 2, and I've only got 3 people left. And then I'm traveling the country, I just got married, and I'm like, okay, am I going to try to like push Division 2 right now for people who didn't do Division 1, or should I put it out to next year? See, at this point, it seems kind of crazy for me to be making plans that far out in advance. I think it's almost definite that Division 2 will begin in August. It should begin in August, but I got to see the buy-in. I got to see the participation, because I could also see putting it in like May of 2024. Okay. No matter what, if you're there for Division 1, then Division 2 is going to be awesome, and you're going to have a really good basis for it, and you'll have a discount for Division 2, et cetera, et cetera. But Division 1, I do have the schedule for Division 1, and so it's right here. Basically, this is the week of April 2nd. This is today is April 2nd. What am I talking about? See, and as you see here on the syllabus, it says announcing why read Being in Time. So that's right now. It's happening. Around April 15th, not necessarily on this day, I will be doing Introducing Being in Time via History of the Concept of Time, because this text is the way in to Being in Time. I think it's going to be a lot easier for you to understand what's going on if you read the introduction and the first 3 chapters of History of the Concept of Time. In fact, I think I just posted something about that on my Instagram, and it has inspired Andrew Flores of Master Signified Bodies, who's one of the K-Voy boys, inspired him to do his own exegetical reading of the introduction of History of the Concept of Time. But I'm actually going to play this for a second, because it's my own little advertisement, as they'd say in Britain, advertisement of this text. And I'm going to I'll play this, say a thing about it, then play one more little trailer while I run to the bathroom, and then I'll close out the stream with a few final words about the logistics, because I still have to show a few things about the schedule. But I want to show you what I'll be talking about in, let's see, basically a couple weeks. Oh, come on. Science, as well as traditional philosophy of science, as well as critiques of the division plus failures of natural science versus social human science, take for granted and cover over both undertakings. As both have time as a horizon and condition of possibility, Heidegger thinks an application of the phenomenological method to time is necessary to rethink what it means to be. For the sciences of nature versus history are the phenomena of being in time. Heidegger's History of the Concept of Time is the lecture series he gave right before writing Being in Time. The first few chapters are the best introduction to being in time you'll get, which is why I'll be doing some lectures on it to prepare for Being in Time this summer. Stay tuned. Stay tuned for some introductory lectures, and get ready for diving into Being in Time this summer. And what you saw there was a time lapse of me reading it while Anne was working on course development for another course we'll be launching, announcing it tomorrow actually, so stay tuned for that live stream. We were at a Starbucks in Guadalajara because a lot of the coffee shops in Guadalajara were not very good for plugging in and using Wi-Fi. They're more just like hanging out. There's less of a writing on your laptop culture in Mexico, and obviously that's not going to be fantastic if you love that, but also it's a good trade-off because what they have is a lot more community, family, etc. So anyway, bringing it back around, the time-lapse reading thing, for me, look, there's no lying to myself. I am able to rise to new levels when I use a camera. and a microphone. For whatever reason, I need this. I cannot learn things as well if I'm not somehow accountable to the big other. And you're all little stand-ins for the big other in various ways. And it's a bunch of bullshit because the big other's not even real. I understand that. But nevertheless, it gets inside my head. It somehow works, right? And so the attention economy hijacks that in a way. Doing a video like that where I time-lapse myself reading actually games the system in a way. It created a situation where now I'm accountable and I actually have to follow through, right? If I went there and read, I would have been way more distracted and I would have fucked off a lot more. So for whatever reason, it helps me. I think it's training wheels on the path to where I want to be. And so I know a lot of other people were like stoked about that video and like, oh my God, I want to do time-lapse videos too. And I'm like, yeah, I think that the time-lapse of the first reading and then the exegetical reading of the second reading approach is a good way for hyper-distracted people who are addicted to the attention economy, who want to extricate themselves from the attention economy, but who nevertheless live in this world and who are therefore looking for some way of leveraging or of hacking the system into being more beneficial for them. So, this alternative sort of new way of approaching these things. Like I said, it might not be better than just being a real scholar, but there's going to be positives and negatives that come with it, and no matter what, it's better than nothing. So anyway, basically for the next 2 months, there's going to be a few lectures where I'm going to be talking about history of the concept of time with Nick. Okay, I mentioned Nick earlier. I said that he's like one of the main kinds of audience people I've got in mind while I'm doing this. He's also going to be one of the leading students, maybe representative student of Being in Time course, meaning that he might be taking on the role that I'm taking on in the conversations with Mikey, where he comes prepared but confused with questions. And I come with lectures and slides, and he will clarify as we go if need be. But when the course actually begins, that's June 3rd. Okay, so June 3rd of this year. And then it basically goes every week, though sometimes you'll get a week off. Okay, there'll be an optional lecture. I'm going to get into that in a second. But basically, it begins June 3rd, ends July 22nd. Okay? That's a pretty fast period of time, but also we're only doing Division 1, so I think that it's doable. The reason that you get a whole week off a couple of times is because a couple of these chapters are massive. So for June 3rd, look, we're going to be talking about 9 pages of the book. If you want to take on the introduction of Being in Time, I will talk about the introduction a bit at that first. We'll be mostly focusing on those 9 pages. The following week, it's only a week later, you will only have had to read 13 pages. Totally doable. But the week after that, chapter 3 is 58 pages. That's too much. And so you get a whole 2 weeks to read those 58 pages. Okay? Then the next week, it's only a week later, it's 20 pages. Then you get 2 more weeks before the 56 pages of chapter 5. You get 2 weeks to read those 56 pages, okay? And really, I like how it's like you read 20 pages and then July 1st, and then you can just go focus on the July 4th weekend and camping or whatever kind of getaway you want to do, whatever kind of partying you're going to do. Go do that. You get a few days, and then you get basically the 2 weeks to read 56 pages. Okay. The most intensive week will be chapter 6, where you've got 45 pages to read in 1 week. But you only have to do a week like that once for this whole course. Okay. So I've set it up so that you can just kind of steel yourself and go, okay, this is a giant chapter. At least I have 2 weeks to read it. Oh my God, another giant chapter. At least I have 2 weeks to read it. But then on the final giant chapter, no. This is the final push. It's not going to be pretty. You're going to be exhausted. You're going to want to just go enjoy your summer. You're going to grind through it. July 15th is where it happens. That'll be the lecture. Oh, no, sorry. July 22nd. That'll be the lecture on chapter 6. And then I'm going to go get married. And you can all go enjoy your next month. And then basically by the time we're in early July, we should have a sense for whether or not Being in Time Division 2 is going to begin in August or later. Okay, but that's going to be something that we figure out together. So that's the logistics. Adam and others who are asking, I hope that you find that useful. Because that's going to be the plan. Is there anything else I have to say before I close this thing out? Does anybody have any questions before I close this thing out? Let me know, because I'll wait another couple minutes. I'm going to play, it's a sort of trailer for an aspect of Being in Time that I really like. I took some stuff that Dr. Ian Thompson said about Being in Time, and I clipped it together and made this beautiful little video. And so I'm going to play this for you. This video is not currently available on my channel, not for public. I will re-release it eventually, but for right now, I just want you to check this out. I'm showing it to you kind of behind the scenes and using it as an opportunity to run to the restroom while I see if anybody in the chat who's catching up on the stream, whatever, might have questions. But let's go.
When you experience existential world collapse and you say, what do I do now? It doesn't help to remember what all your teachers and parents and priests told you should do. That has absolutely no grip on you. It doesn't help. Most people reading Being in Time misunderstand death because they think of what they mean by death when they read Heidegger using the word death. But he doesn't mean what we mean by death. He calls that demise. And he distinguishes what he means by death by articulating it's a kind of profound existential world collapse where, say, what he calls my fundamental for the sake of which, that is like the project that organizes all my other projects, like being a teacher. Let's say that collapses. I get a brain injury or something and I can no longer be a teacher. Well, then all the other projects that sort of propped up that project of being a teacher are going to collapse too. And I'm going to be, it's not like I'm gone. I still exist in the world. I'm just desperately now trying to connect to a world that I can no longer connect to. That's death. I mean, Freud would call mourning. It's like we continue to reach for a world we can no longer step into and understand ourselves in terms of. And then what happens? Well, that's Being in Time calls this authenticity. Authenticity has two sides, the full definition of authenticity. This is the second division of Being in Time, the existential division. Authenticity is defined as anticipatory resoluteness. So anticipation is this kind of death that you experience in life when you're at an end. Because the other death, demise, the ceasing to live, you don't live through. Where death is, I am not. Where I am, death is not. Death and I don't ever occupy the same place. I can experience myself dying, but I can't experience myself being dead. So I can't have a phenomenology of being dead if death means demise. Existiert endlich, of existing finitely or at an end, where my existence comes to an end because there's no longer any part of me standing outside myself. As long as I'm a teacher, a father, whatever, a student, there's something for me to do tomorrow. There's something I did yesterday. But when my whole world collapses and I can't be anything, I am now completely transparent to myself. And for methodological reasons, he thinks that's a really important move. This is how Division 2 begins. That's what introduces the discussion of death. So death is this kind of world collapse where then I have to find my way back to the world. So that's resolve or Entschlossenheit, disclosedness. So my world collapses, and then he says in Being in Time, I choose to choose. I decide what self I'm going to be, and I project myself back into the world. later by 34 in The Origin of the Work of Art, he says, it's not about like what you saying, well, do I want to be an artist or a teacher or a poet or a whatever, a stockbroker? Which self do I want to be? What project do I want to be? It's you opening yourself to the hints that reality is offering to you and creatively deciding which of those hints to disclose. And then I take responsibility for how I creatively disclose those hints. I think personal responsibility is something Heidegger is far too quick to erase in his own kind of mystical, quietistic vision of himself as this passive vehicle of providence that's just letting being speak through him, as if he's just taking dictation. But as I say, Heraclitus has this great line: nature, physis, neither lies nor tells you. I'm simplifying. It merely hints. Meaning the way reality speaks to you is it gives you hints, and it's up to you how you creatively disclose those hints. His analysis of death is drawn from his analysis of demise. So he's trying to start, like Aristotle, with what we all know about death, at least what we all think we know about death, the formal characteristics of ordinary death, and then articulate the ontological conditions that structure our everyday experience of death, what he calls demise. So for him, ontological death, this world collapse, is what we're really afraid about, to put it simply, about dying. So he does think, I think, that there's a possible profound transformation in our relationship to death, where instead of just running away from it our whole lives, fleeing it, and thereby running ever more quickly toward it, we can confront it, embrace it as part of life, the last part, or as something that's demise, and understand death as something like what we need to repeatedly pass through in order to repeatedly slough off the skin of outdated self-understandings that are holding us back, instead of letting us move on to the next stage in our evolution, and the next stage in our, let's say, self-development. Life involves passing through a series of stages where you have to die to the old self that you were in order to become the new self that you're on the way to becoming. And that's not something that just happens once. If you're doing it right, it happens again and again and again. And part of that is getting over the terror of that, so that you're not every time desperately clinging to what you were when it's no longer possible. It's not working for you to be that. You got to be able to let it go in order to open yourself to what's coming next. And I think, today the problem of das Man, that is of this thoughtless conformism, this kind of ubiquitous norms of propriety, what you must do to be one of us, one of the good guys, is so amplified by social media, and it's like the prison is getting tighter and tighter. So I would think that for anybody who doesn't fit that, what the world is saying you've got to be, the motivations are getting stronger and stronger to break out of that and reject the world of, thoughtless conformity on what we must be, and think for yourself what you want to be, and ask those hard questions. What do I want to do with my life? When you experience existential world collapse and you say, what do I do now? It doesn't help to remember what all your teachers and parents and priests told you should do. That has absolutely no grip on you. It doesn't help. And Levinas's view was, what you need when your world collapses is a teacher. That is, you need someone who can show you a path forward. Sometimes you need a teacher.
Yeah. So to the people who had never seen that before, cool. It's, I dropped that video back in I don't know. When did I publish that? Let's see. Wasn't it 2019, 2020, something like that? I used one of my favorite songs for it. So it's, it got hit by copyright struck or whatever. It wasn't for money. I just put it out there because it's just an artistic thing. I wanted to make that video. But the song was Forever Lost by God is an Astronaut. I love that song. And I thought it really fits the occasion for some reason. So we're going to close out the stream here in a minute, but I got to touch on a couple of final points. And that is the logistical details. I already showed you the reading schedule. I'm going to also check in on the chat, right? But basically, the main questions that you should have are like, okay, so how should you begin to prepare for this? And what is the, which text to purchase? You can obviously go to some place like Library Genesis and pirate the text. Some of those pirated editions are better than others. But the translation that we are using is the Macquarie and Robinson one. In fact, it's basically like these two that you see right here. There's a couple other covers of this text. You see, look on the screen, you see like on the left side, it's the one with the black circle on the white background and the sort of like postmodern like styling. On the right-hand side, it's like the intimidating black book that says Being in Time in white letters. Either one of those is the same, Macquarie and Robinson, or Macquarie and Robinson edition. Now, I don't know, I think that there's like two other covers for this text. Be careful if you buy off of a place like Amazon. It might show you one cover and it's actually a different one. See if they actually say what it is. Joan Stambaugh has a fantastic translation, but we're not using it. I have been in learning dynamics around this text where one of the people involved was using the Joan Stambaugh, and it created enough confusion that I don't want to have to deal with that. If you are accustomed to the Joan Stambaugh edition, it will be worthwhile to learn the Macquarie and Robinson edition. Vice versa is also true. It is good for people who've read the Macquarie and Robinson edition to also read the Joan Stambaugh edition. There is no objectively better translation because different translations are different interpretations. And because any interpretation where a person's rigorously thought through this work is going to be a beneficial thing to think through, like it's all around beneficial to read them both. But getting a grip in this text, you're going to want to have the same text in your hand that the other people also trying to get a grip in this conversation are holding. If you can just read the original German, awesome. Good job. And I'm proud of you, but we're not going to be doing it. Now, there is a concern about translation, and that is that you're just better off reading the original. People will say this all the time. You're better off reading the original. Of course. I'm also better off having all my time, energy, and being able to do everything I want. As far as what is efficacious, though, we're going to want to go with the same interpretation translation. But there's another point, and that is something that Hubert Dreyfus says. Now, you can look up Hubert Dreyfus on YouTube. His lectures on Being in Time at UC Berkeley are publicly available. He read this book every year with a group of grad students. Every year, a new group of grad students, he would read this text and lecture on it. And we actually get the benefit of being able to watch those lectures after he's already passed away. He passed away a few years ago. He was one of Dr. Ian Thompson's professors. He was like his main professor. And so Dreyfus is a king, but something that he says that I really like is that Being in Time is a profoundly confusing text even in German because Heidegger is using language in a way that's different than normal German. He's not only using a lot of peasant idioms and turning those into rigorous concepts in a sort of way, but he's also working outside of the norms and strictures of academic philosophy of his time, while at the same time challenging it and critiquing it. So it's really, I think Dreyfus actually says that it's almost like you have an advantage reading this in a different, even though it's translated and it is an interpretation, because you're not reading it in the native language, you actually have an advantage. if you are a German speaker, thinker, reader, who's like, taking on this challenge, it's still going to be alien to you. It's like reading Shakespeare is for us English speakers. It's like, what the hell? You still have to learn what you're doing. And when that's happening, it's pretty easy to think you know what it's saying when you actually don't. For that reason, translations done by people who spent a lot of time working through these things and knowing that they were outside the language and knowing that they had to be in dialogue with all of the academics in the field and knowing that they had to really like have a basis in all of the secondary literature in order to do the translation, it's almost like it accelerates things in a certain way. With all that said, I love this book called Rephrasing Heidegger. I forget the author's name off the top of my head, where he thinks that all the translations are bad and he's giving his own take on everything. It's great. And he says he's like, I will not defend Heidegger's difficult writing style. I think that it's atrocious. And he says, the Macri and Robinson book, it's so difficult. It's so difficult, he says. Well, fair enough. But I already gave my defense of why I think it matters. Why I think that Heidegger's writing style is actually a proof of some of the points that he's trying to make about meaning. So in conjunction with that, I think that we can have our cake and eat it too. We get to be profoundly confused, become defamiliarized towards the familiar, to get a basis in this text that everyone else will be also confused with. We'll be speaking kind of the same language, right? And then we can problematize it later. And we can read other translations later. And we can read Rephrasing Heidegger later. But for now, it's the Macri and Robinson edition. So definitely get the Macri and Robinson edition. And then, and Joan Stambach will read your version eventually, I promise. And then someday, I'll be reading it in German. But these are longer term goals. Preparation. Focus on history of the concept of time for now. This book is the lecture series that he gave leading up to writing Being in Time. He was not quite ready to write Being in Time at the time that it was forced out of him. Someone forced him to write it. In order to maintain his position at the university, he had to publish. And so he went ahead and put together Being in Time. This is the lectures. And he's an amazing lecturer. He's got a way with words. And I think that this is a lot more accessible than Being in Time. But more importantly, the introduction in the first 3 chapters of History of the Concept of Time is the real introduction to Being in Time. What he wrote as parts 1 and 2 of the introduction of Being in Time, what you'll see at the beginning of Being in Time, is something he wrote after the fact. And he's trying to clarify things, preempt certain arguments. It's really a preface written after the fact, or you could kind of think of it as an afterword. It's not an introduction. This is the introduction. This is where he talks about what phenomenology does, what normal critics of phenomenology say, why those people are wrong, but why he himself also disagrees with phenomenology and seeks to go beyond Husserl by going through Husserl in a way that maintains fidelity to the fundamental questions, assumptions, and approach of this discipline. It's absolutely essential. And so I will be doing exegetical readings of this text. I will be doing lecture, interview, conversations on this text in the next month and a half as a way of preparing for Being in Time. Finally, how to read Being in Time. Let's just say that you want to jump right into it. Just really, if you can read and reread chapter one, the 9 pages of chapter 1, that's going to be more advantageous than focusing on the introduction. Okay, if you have to make a choice, then make that choice. If you don't have to make a choice, then do all of the above. Absolutely. The first lecture on June 3rd, that lecture, which is going to be, we never even talked about the time, right? But the time of these lectures is going to be 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Eastern, and 6 p.m. Central Eastern European. 6 p.m. Central European time, CET. But this is going to be Saturday mornings on the West Coast, noon on the East Coast of the U.S., and 6 p.m. in Central Europe. Okay? So it's going to be one of the ones where a lot of people are going to be able to make it, I expect. Saturdays, it's going to be going down. Okay? But how to read. So people who are not accustomed to being overwhelmed and lost in a text try to look up every word they do not understand, and then they get caught looking into Wikipedia and the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and they just go down all of these various rabbit holes and get distracted from ever really making progress with the text, and then you feel defeated afterwards. Yeah, you learn a few new words, but then you forget those a few days later anyway. How does a baby learn? By being immersed in language. Do they learn how to read the dictionary first and then learn the definitions of words? Or do they just get immersed and then repeat and then repeat and then have conversations with people, or learn how to have conversations with people using the language? That is how they do it. That's how babies do it. I can verify. I've been around babies. I know how they learn language. I've seen it with my own eyes, okay? So that's how we, as little baby, being in time readers, are going to learn how to read. I use the 80-20 rule here. When and how to get bogged down, the answer is 80-20. Stay bogged down and confused 80% of the time, and then go back a few pages, look at things and be like, okay, I'm going to spend 20% of the time looking up this word, looking up that word, looking into this example. But the reason I say 80-20 is because obviously you got to do it somewhat, but you can't pursue every question you have about the text on the first reading. The first reading is just to get the lay of the land, okay? With a text this difficult, you might have to do a couple readings just to get the lay of the land before you really get to the reading where now you're trying to tie in, how do I talk about this in my own words? The exegetical reading should only come after you've gotten the lay of the land a couple of times. Take some notes before you do an exegetical reading on this text. Really, don't just do it off the cuff. Okay, read it. If you need accountability partner, set up a time lapse recording and then just focus on reading, and that way we'll know. Okay, come on, don't be distracted. Focus. Exegetical reading can come later. Okay. Finally, the third reading, which you probably won't do this year. The third reading is the one where you actually run it up against other things that you know. So after you've read and reread and read and reread, thinkers like Hegel and Deleuze, sure, after you've reread them a few times, and after you've reread this text a few times, sure, now you can compare and contrast. But if you're trying to draw comparisons and contrasting with other thinkers while reading this book on your first pass, you are wasting your time. And that kind of activity is banned at Theory Underground. We just don't tolerate it. If you like that kind of thing, if you want to compare and contrast when you've not already reread and read over and over and over again, just go anywhere else. Everyone else they all seem to want to do that. Okay, but drawing comparisons and contrast, it's just not useful until you've done your first couple of readings. And so we're trying to get that basis in the text on its own terms. We don't take other people's interpretations of Heidegger that seriously any more than we take Heidegger's interpretation of Nietzsche or Hegel that seriously. Thinkers are famous for misunderstanding one another. What we care about as readers is the text itself and what can we do with it? What does it do to us? And what kind of sense can we make from trying to get around it and work through? That's all we can do. Okay. So the 80-20 rule is get the lay of the land. If you have to go look something up, don't look it up the first time you read it. Just keep going. Go back a few pages once you're ready to take a break, then go look it up. I promise that will help. You'll appreciate it. So with all of that said, I'm about to close this out. I'm going to check in on the chat though. How's it going in there? Is it dead? Do we have people? What's up? What a great ending stock animation. I know, that really set the vibe, didn't it? I should have led with that video for this lecture, but yeah, there we have. Tony, I'm so stoked that you've read Heidegger, that you've engaged with Heidegger, that you've taken on the challenge. And to everybody else who's thinking about doing this course, I really think it'll be transformative, but I also just don't want to encourage you to dive in the deep end if you're not up to it, if you've not already been thinking about it. Because going back to what I said at the beginning, I don't recommend that everybody does this. I think that this is something that has to have been on your radar for a while. It's not for the faint of heart, and you might be courageous and able to take on difficult things, but I wouldn't recommend doing this and trying to live a life in the summertime. You're going to be killing yourself in a more productive way than other ways that you might kill yourself. So before it can become jouissance, though, it will just be difficult. If you could actually develop a sort of get your sense of jouissance from reading a text like this, that'd be dope. That'll be life-changing. In and of itself, that'll be worthwhile. But also, I think that this text, theoretically, philosophically, it doesn't get much more profound. All right. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining. I'm going to roll the advertisement on the U.S. tour. The U.S. tour is coming soon to a city near you. If you don't see your city on this map, be advised, Pittsburgh and Chicago are now added to the map. Berlin is added to the map, though we don't have a date for Berlin just yet. And how do we add someone to the map? Well, because someone invites us. We're not going to cities where we're not invited. We're not going to just go to New York City because it's the biggest city, or LA because it's the biggest city. No, we're going to go to places where we know people, where we have fellow travelers. And the chances are, if you're in New York City or LA, you care too much about PMC upward mobility to really be engaged with a project like this anyway. You should probably focus on your career and not try to get to the bottom of things. You should be focusing on take making and opinion dropping and, making clickbait, soundbite style shit that plays within doxa and ideology. Just go do that. I cannot blame you for doing that. Absolutely. Just go do what you got to do. But if you're at a different place in your life and you're looking to do some underground shit, then reach out, get involved, invite us to your city. We'll come, even if it's just a few of us hanging out, talking about philosophy and theory, giving talks, presentations, talking about these books, maybe doing some theater-related stuff as well. That's in the works. If you're down, it's going to be...
Tight, yeah!
It's going to be good. All right, everyone. But anyway, all aboard. Not all aboard. Okay, I was going to say all aboard Being in Time course at Theory Underground. But really, not all. Just those who feel called. All aboard. Hold on. I tried to push my button and it opened the wrong thing. And with that, I'll roll the commercial. In an attempt to bring in new people to the world of philosophy and theory while building on relationships already established, we are doing a countrywide tour of the United States this fall.
What's up, guys? It's Ann and
Are we
Dave.
coming to a city or a town near you? Do you think there is a venue or audience in your local region that would be interested in a lecture or facilitated discussion about existentialism, critiques of therapism, PMC ideology, self-help, introduction to philosophy, or the time-energy critique of any of those things? This speaking and discussion facilitation tour will include the Pacific Northwest in mid-August, the Kansas City, Missouri area late August or early September, Philadelphia at the beginning of October, and really we're going to be all over the area there, hopefully, so get in contact with us if you think that we should come visit your state. Phoenix, Arizona, mid-October, in SoCal, especially San Diego, late October. I say especially San Diego because we already have our guide for the San Diego region. What's the difference between a host, a guide, and a volunteer, you ask? Well, thanks for asking, actually. The volunteer role is for people who want to put up posters or in other ways promote the events that will be occurring in their town or city, whereas the host might have a guest bedroom, guest house, or a place that we can park our van so that we can sleep in our van. We need to know if you would have like bathroom facilities or anything like that. And so the form on the website is where you can tell us what you have to offer. Guiding, on the other hand, though, people who love to guide take a lot of pride in their local knowledge. A good example of that would be Michael Downs when I visited him in Raytown, Missouri, and he took me into Kansas City, and we had barbecue, and he took me to the mall and to all these other landmark places from his life growing up there. But a more recent example would be my friend Michael in Poland, who took us around Katowice, Poland, and basically gives a historical and sociological analysis of everything, and it was amazing. It was one of the coolest things we've ever experienced, and it made us realize some people just want to provide the space and privacy, whereas other people want to take you out and show you around. And so if you're interested in being a volunteer, host, or guide, we have a special form for that. So please fill out your information and get in contact with us as soon as possible so we can fit you into the schedule, because we'll love to meet you, touch base with the local community. And if you don't think anyone else in your area is interested in the things that you're interested in, if you don't think anyone else is into this stuff, well, we might be able to surprise you.
When I saw that poster, Bold Grill Art in Boise, fucking Idaho, are you kidding me? It was virtually an answer to an unspoken prayer, It really was. And I just couldn't believe that somebody was interested in the things that I was interested in, that I had been interested in for years and had kind of given up on in futility. I'd labored in solitude for so long. I had no one to talk to about it, no one to bounce ideas off.
This tour is going to bring together a lot of people who want to be based in Texas with the people they're in conversation with. And yeah, I think it's going to be a fantastic year. The only other thing that I want to say is that Michael Downs' first book is going to be published by Theory Underground really soon here. I've got another book coming out really soon here. These books will be spread throughout the United States on this tour. So I'm hoping to be able to do some actual book launch events at various bookstores. Outside of that, I guess the last thing that I would say is that Michael Downs is gearing up to teach For They Know Not What They Do by Slavoj Žižek. We're putting out all these introduction videos and other interviews related to the topic of Hegel, Lacan, Žižek, because we want to give people an accessible and sturdy basis in the discourse. The problem is that Michael Downs is very busy having to work at a wage slave job. And so if you want to help in freeing Mikey, make sure to go to his Patreon at patreon.com/thedangerousbaby and make a donation. Thank you. I would be remiss to close this out without a quick shout out to our patrons and our anonymous donors. Thank you so much for the donations. Already, we've only been around for a month. We already got over $3,000 in donations, and so thank you. And stay tuned for the app, which is on its way. There will be a Theory Underground app. So the current setup is that it is a social media site built around courses, where you can suppose that people who are involved in the discussions have a shared interest in the same or similar texts, and where you can assume in a lot of the discussions that, yeah, people have read the stuff that you're reading, that you're bringing into dialogue. And so, for instance, The Idea of the University by Carl Jaspers, dedicated for him. Slavoj Žižek's For They Know Not What They Do, dedicated for him. And then as people take the course over the years, new people will be coming into that forum. And so if you get in there early, you'll be able to see how the conversation evolves. And as new people add into the conversation, it'll bring back memories and like things that you want to work through, questions that you had with the first time that you read the text. And so I'm really excited for this. The reason I've built this website is because I think that this is what's lacking in so many other spaces, is that ability to return, to be able to communicate after the fact and in a sustained way. on a platform that's not attention grabby and annoying like Discord. And so stay tuned because there is an app on the way. Thank you to our donors. If you want to donate, go to theory-underground.com/support. Thank you.